Well, thank you guys for coming out this early to see us. This is the Diablo 3. It's still weird to be able to say that. Diablo 3 lore and environment art panel. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how we're combining art and lore to expand and deepen the player's experience of the world. We want to give the player a deeper, more engaging experience, and basically, make it more emotional and thoughtful as you're crushing demons and whatnot. First, we're going to talk about the world, and then we're going to look into how we're bringing a deeper story and expanding the role-playing experience to the game. And we're not going to sacrifice the action while doing that. And after that, I'll hand it over to Brian. I guess I should introduce myself and Brian. My name is Leonard Bowarski. I'm the lead world designer. And this is Brian Morriso. He's the art director. And thank you very much.
And actually, while we're at it, we got a bunch of Diablo 3 developers spread throughout the audience here, too. So if you're in the mood for applause, go ahead and give them a round as well.
All right, so the first thing we wanted to do when we looked at the Diablo series is we really wanted to, we looked at it and we saw that there was a lot of unexplored potential in the previous games. What do we mean by that? Well, Diablo is unique among fantasy universes in that it's not based around dwarves and elves, but it's a much darker world based around angels and demons. In fact, it was created by angels and demons, and now it's being fought over by the forces of hell and angels and lightness. And we just think that that's a really fascinating setting, and we've only scratched the surface in the previous games, and we think that there's really a lot of depth that can be mined there that hasn't been looked into previously. And to do that, we looked at, we have to start with the world, we have to start somewhere. And civilizations don't just crop up out of nowhere. They are a result of, environment or political forces. So we have to start with the civilizations. Where do they come from? What are their people like? And what are their ruling classes and that kind of thing. So as an example of that, we're going to look at Chaldeum. Now, Chaldeum is a new place, a new city for Diablo 3. It is the largest trade center in all of Sanctuary, which is the Diablo 3 universe world. And it's, if you remember Galine in Diablo 2, this is, that was kind of like a trade outpost for Chaldeum. And the, when you have a trade center, it's kind of an innovative place because you have a lot of philosophy, a lot of trade, a lot of different cultures getting together and talking. You just have a place where there's a lot of ideas, a lot of innovation going on, and the government basically is there to just make sure that the money keeps flowing. So when you have a place like that, and then the main city of the area, which is Karast, which you saw destroyed in Diablo 2, falls, and the government from there moves over to Chaldeum, which is what happened. It changes a place. So that's something we've explored in depth. How does that change a culture? How does that change how the day-to-day life goes in that place? All of these things we take into account when we're looking at an area. How does this affect the story? How does this affect the quests you're doing? Things of that nature. We also went relatively deep in our exploration of the world in terms of areas you're not actually going to see in this game. Some of the places that player characters came from, you won't be seeing in this game, and obviously we have to flesh those out so we have a good background for our characters. Also, there's other areas that you need to know what effect they've had on the world, but just in general, for you to feel as a player that there's a world outside your immediate experience, it helps us as developers to know what's actually going on in the world at large. Scovos is a great example of this. The picture you just saw, as well as this picture right here. This is the place where the Ascari Society is located. The Ascari Society gave us the rogues in the first Diablo game and the Amazons in Diablo 2, but the society itself hasn't really been explored in the past. They are a very ancient society. They have not had a lot of contact with the outside world, in terms of a lot of trade and a lot of exchange of philosophies and whatnot. And how do they develop differently? They trace themselves back to the early mythology of the angels, and they were supposedly founded by an angel and her lover, who was a human. So, they have a totally different view of the world than some other civilizations who have grown up around different mythologies. So that's the extent that we're going to as designers, to really flesh out this world and make it feel like a living place. We don't want to belabor this fact when the player's running around trying to get his next quest and figure out where he has to go next. So how do we get this across to the player? Well, one of the ways you do that is by having NPCs that reflect where they come from. And this is this really helps us in two ways, because for a great RPG role-playing game, you need great NPCs, non-player characters, to give you quests, to make it feel like you're playing in a living world that has some depth to it. And to make living characters, or characters that feel like they have this, they need a culture. And vice versa, you have, if you have these characters reacting and speaking and dressing to reflect this culture, that also tells the player a lot about the culture without going into long monologues about where this culture came from and whatnot. This picture here is Citizens of Chaldeum. As you can see from an artistic standpoint, it's an Eastern type feel. One of the ways we go about this is we look at civilizations in our world that we might want to take influences from in terms of just cloth and clothing and daily life and things like that. All right, now we're going to go and look at the story for the game and how that has changed. So first, what do we feel is the purpose for the story in an action game? Some people will tell you that you don't need a story for an action game, or much of a story for an action game, and I would disagree with that. And I really think that the main emphasis, or the main reason you need to have a good story even in an action game, is it gives a lot of emphasis to the action that you're doing as a character. It really gives meaning to what you're doing. If we can, as developers, make you want to find out what's going to happen next in the story, as much as you want to find out get your next level or get your next piece of armor, then that's just another reason to drive you forward and keep you engaged in the game for longer. Another thing we've done is to extend the use of PC voice, player voice in this game. In the previous games, players had voice, but mostly to tell you things like your inventory was full, or slightly comment on the environment around them. We feel that you're playing a very specific character in this game. It's not a generic off-the-shelf fighter or a generic off-the-shelf witch doctor, because there's just way too many witch doctors out there in the gaming world. So we've given them specific personalities, and with specific personalities, we've given them also very specific voices. And with this comes a unique or a different conversation system than we've had in the past. In the past, you've gone through monologues. People have spoken at you. You haven't had conversations with them. This will make the storytelling more engaging. It'll make it more lively. It'll move faster. But it will also allow your character to feel more like he's driving the action, more of a heroic entity in the story, and less like an errand boy, and that tends to happen somewhat in RPGs. So we tell the story through dialogue and lore books that you can find in the game. But another tactic we like to use is to use the environment to tell the story. How we do that is to set up visual clues or scripted events that will tell you things about the world as you come upon them. For instance, if I run into a group of cultists summoning a demon, and then the demon turns on them and attacks them, that tells you something about their level of competence, which is not very high. If I follow a trail of dead bodies to a warrior who's sitting atop a massive mound of dead demons meditating peacefully, that tells me a lot about that character. That's a very interesting character that I want to get to know without him having to say one word. In this way, we make it engaging for the player. We don't slow down the action, but on the other hand, we're hoping to engage players who are more action-oriented and may not come into this game feeling that they want much of a story, because we understand there's players out there who just want more and more action. They don't want to be, quote, bogged down with a story. we want those people to be intrigued by these things. So we feel like using the environment to tell the story not only helps us tell a better story, it helps us to intrigue people who might not want to, who come into the game not necessarily caring about that sort of thing. So let's look at the specific story that we're going to tell. Our story takes place 20 years after the events of Diablo II, Lord of Destruction, which was the expansion to Diablo II. And Cain is convinced that hell will invade. It has not. Everyone was convinced that hell was going to invade as soon as Tyrael destroyed the World Stone, which I will explain more in a moment if you don't know what that means. But this has not happened. Cain feels very guilty and responsible for what happened in the first 2 Diablo games. He was raised with a lot of the legends and the lore of the Haradrim. He feels that he should have known what was coming when he saw the signs of Diablo rising again. Of course, he could have done nothing about it. If he had, we wouldn't have had a game. But, you know, it's what drives him. So he's been spending this time researching how is he going to help defeat hell when they come back and try to invade. And a lot of people who lived through the events are no longer alive. I mean, this is a world of like the Middle Ages. If you live to 40 years old, you're very lucky. Obviously, Cain has been very, very lucky. But the people who did live through it are generally heroes, like the people you played in Diablo II or the first Diablo game, or normal people. And normal people, or your run-of-the-mill individual, just really didn't know how to cope with an experience like coming face-to-face with this kind of serious evil. So a lot of those people went crazy. If they're still survived, you know, who knows where they are. So the general population either didn't see any of this or have tried to put it behind them, and it has become seen as myth or exaggeration. No one really believes that this really happened, and this is, you know, making Cain's job even that much more difficult. So a big question that people have been asking a lot about is what has happened to Tyrael? For those of you not familiar with the lore, Tyrael is an angel who has been helping mankind through the previous games against the wishes of the rest of heaven. Now, at the end of Diablo II, Lord of Destruction, he was forced to destroy an important artifact known as the World Stone. And that was the last time any of us saw him. What has he been doing all this time? No one has talked to him. No one has heard from him. Cain, you know, last time he saw him was when Tyrael went into the cave to destroy the World Stone. So, you know, what has he been punished? You know, he stood right in front of this very powerful artifact when it exploded. Sure, he's an angel, but did that change him in any way? What happened to him as a result of this? So no one knows. It's been 20 years. No one's heard anything from him. Why hasn't hell invaded is a very important question. Everyone expected hell to invade as soon as the World Stone was destroyed, but no one has heard anything from hell, which again has helped to convince people that this whole thing was kind of blown out of proportion or exaggerated. So these are questions that we're going to look into further, and I'm sure you guys want to know a lot more about them, and basically we're not going to talk about any of that right now. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian, and he's going to tell you a little bit how we use the art and the environment to further these kind of goals.
So again, my name is Brian Morser. I'm the art director on Diablo III. And so basically that's a lot of information that Leonard just kicked out, and that in combination with what Jay Wilson was talking about yesterday with our design goals and gameplay goals with Diablo III. As an art staff, it's our job to take all that information and use that as a stepping stone or a base for how we approach our art style and how we can support both the story and the game design elements of the game. So with that in mind, we also have sort of core Blizzard values as an art staff, and these are them right here: stylization over realism, strong silhouette, but ultimately make it epic and really just support the gameplay. That's really kind of what we're about. And so these are kind of the philosophies that I'm going to be talking about over the course of this presentation and how we go about creating our art style. But for the our first approach to this project, when we first kind of got started, the most important thing for us was to really understand where we were as a development team, where we came from, and what the expectations of this franchise were from our player base. And being fans ourselves, we really wanted to explore the idea of what made us so, what got us into the game in the first place, what made it so enjoyable for us over the years to play and work on this franchise. So that's really where we started from, was just going back to Diablo, taking a look at where we started, where we came from, and really kind of condense it down to its core so that we could move forward as an art staff. And really what we discovered was this is kind of visually a horror game. That's what we were going after, was trying to capture that feeling of a horror genre. So with that being the basis, we started to explore further into the franchise with Diablo 2. So after playing through Diablo, we kind of took a look at Diablo 2 and tried to figure out, what it is that we did right with expanding on Diablo 2, and that's so that's where we started with that. Is just not only did we continue with the horror vibe in Diablo 2, but then we started to expand the universe. Diablo was all about kind of exploring Tristram, just a very limited area within the world, and then Diablo 2 opened that up into a much grander world and explored lots of different areas within the Diablo universe. And so that's something we wanted to push as well. And one of the really interesting things that we were finding through Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, from an art standpoint, which was really interesting to us, was our memory of what Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 were. It was a little bit different than what the actuality of it was. Visually speaking, we were remembering it as a much more dark, kind of gray, colorless game, but when we played through the two previous franchises, we were discovering a lot of vibrancy in both the creatures and the environments, and that's something that we wanted to expand upon in Diablo 3 as well, was latching onto some of those core values that we had established with those two franchises and move forward. So taking all of that into consideration, along with the story and the previous games, updating that was quite a task. Luckily, we have a fantastic group of artists to work on this thing. And so we kind of sat down and took all those core values and started really redefining what we wanted to do artistically. We have a new updated engine. We're in 3D, but we decided, not to do a full 3D roaming camera. It's still an isometric game. It's still very true to the Diablo universe. That was very important to us. And when we started looking at that camera and what we could use a fixed isometric camera for as an art staff, it was actually probably the best decision we could have made. It really makes our job easier to make the art and environments really come alive and just much more vibrant, and the use of colors that we're using really helped to support the gameplay. So getting back to our core philosophies at Blizzard, the first one being stylization over realism. One of the interesting things about working at Blizzard, stylization, sometimes people can kind of equate that with being a little bit cartoony or a Disney art style, but that's really not what we're going after with the Diablo art style here. We understand, looking back at Diablo and Diablo 2, the universe is very dark. Leonard was talking about the story, and this is a universe that was created by demons and angels, basically, and it's a common occurrence to see those things on a daily basis. And so there's a certain level of grit and realism that we want to bring to the game, but at the same time, it's important to take the player into a fantasy realm. That's what we're really all about here, is exploring that idea of giving you something that you've never seen before. And if we simply took photographs and just applied that to a bunch of polygons, and that's really not us doing our job, So we really wanted to explore and push this idea of bringing a unique, different look to the Diablo 3 universe, but being very careful not to get too cartoony so as to deviate too far from what we had established with the previous games. So the next core philosophy is strong silhouettes. And in the environment, this serves multiple purposes, really. The biggest one for us, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, is it actually supports the gameplay fairly well. When you open up the gameplay space and use larger shapes to define your gaming world, it actually allows for a lot more creatures on screen, and that's really the important thing for us, is to get as many creatures on there so that you can kill them as fast as possible, which is just kind of what the Diablo game is all about, and as we said, that's really our job, is to support the gameplay. The other interesting side effect of creating strong silhouettes is that it adds to the epic feel. When you create large shapes, large bricks, walls that have interesting silhouettes to them, it really makes the universe much more of a fantasy land. If you look around us here in the convention hall, for an example, a lot of the angles and silhouettes that you see here are very straight, very 90-degree, and that's something that we try to avoid because you see that on a daily basis. Everything that we see in the real world is very straight and angular. So in the game world, because we want to transport you to a different location and really represent ourselves as a fantasy realm, it's very important to us to, ground it in reality. We have, walls that go straight up and down, but within that wall, there's a lot of shape, a lot of different bricks standing out, railings that have good shape, things like that. So it just makes it more visually pleasing, as well as supporting the gameplay again by opening up that gameplay space and allowing as many monsters on screen as possible. Now, color was probably one of the most controversial things that we were trying to work with here in the game, because as I said, our memory was actually a little bit different of Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 than we had thought. Originally, we thought, man, this, it's going to be cool. It's going to be this gray, washed-out universe, really dark, just nooks and crannies of just black, right? But when we actually went back and played it, there are some very vibrant areas within Diablo and Diablo 2, and that was something that we really kind of latched onto and wanted to explore more. So we actually did a lot of research on horror movies or movies that we thought were accomplished that horror vibe very well. And one of the things that we were discovering was the use of color to establish mood, and we thought that was very important. And so that's something that we carried over into our art style for Diablo 3 as well, was choosing our palettes very, very carefully. Now we have, if you see up here on my slide, on the right-hand side, I have basically a gradient. These are just color swatches or color picks straight from the screenshots themselves. They're very, very vibrant. When seen just outside of the screenshot without any context, they're extremely saturated, very vibrant, but when you put them within context, which is the important thing about using color, it actually can establish a very powerful mood, using dark greens and dark blues to establish a horror vibe or a very ominous kind of Big Brother is watching type of a vibe. So you can get away with using very vibrant colors, which is very visually pleasing, but at the same time maintaining that core value of the Diablo franchise, which is maintaining that horror vibe. And when you also aren't afraid of color anymore, you can start to use color to your advantage to lead the gameplay where you want it to go. So if you have an overall color scheme of green, when you punch up and put a torch in that scene, that bright orange flame or that bright orange torch now becomes a beacon for the player to follow, making gameplay, again, which is what we're all about supporting, making gameplay easier for the player to understand, making it more enjoyable visually to look at, and just everything comes together more seamlessly that way. Now, dynamic animations might not seem like it would fit in an environment talk, but that was one of the big things that we wanted to bring into the environments of Diablo 3, which is making them feel more alive. Not only do we have destructibles, and that's what the video up here is kind of going over, is just a few examples, and I think you saw it in the gameplay trailer yesterday of how we're using the environment with selective destruction, using the environment to your advantage to possibly kill monsters, and ultimately, when we decided how much breakable stuff we wanted to put in the game, it really just comes down to, it's not really a scientific like a scientific formula or anything like that. It's really just, it's freaking cool to break stuff, and that's really what it comes down to. And so that's kind of what we go after, is just how much breakable stuff can we put into the scene before it gets too overwhelming. And it turns out you can put quite a bit in there because it's just a lot of fun to go around stomping stuff. Doesn't really matter if the gameplay is not that fun. And so that's what our job is. As beautiful as we want to make it, as talented as our art staff is, we're not doing our job well if the gameplay doesn't read well, you don't know where you're going, the creatures don't pop off the background, you don't know, what your hero class looks like very easily. So all of those core philosophies that we just talked about really kind of revolve around making the gameplay much more enjoyable. So those are our core philosophies, and I want to just give you a brief glimpse at how the overall workflow of our environment process works. We have a very talented design staff. Jay Wilson was talking yesterday with his level designers, Carl Lavoie, Mark Choi, and Dave Adams. We work with those guys very, very closely. As I said, you can't really support gameplay unless you have a good rapport with your designers, and that's really important for us at Blizzard. And so up here is just an example of a few early sketches of what kind of level designs look like. And for those of you who are interested in how our random dungeon system works, this kind of gives you a brief glimpse at how we do it. It's really kind of a room-by-room basis, and each one of these rooms has certain exits and entryways that we can snap together in different ways, kind of like Lego pieces or puzzle pieces. But this is where it all starts, with the design team giving us these simple little sketches, and we sit down and talk about them, talk with Leonard and the story guys about what we want to accomplish visually and what they need supported with our art. And so that's really where we start. The other thing we do at this time, because it's important, it takes a lot of effort to get an environment destructible, is we start talking about what we want interactive. What it is that we want to break, what we want animated, how we need to bring this thing to life. So here you can actually see, I think these are Carl Lavoie's sketches. His little cartoons are very entertaining. But you can see, a minecart smashing into a wall, a cave, a simple cave-in, things like that. All of this needs to be designed ahead of time. These things don't just happen in the game randomly. We put them there on purpose. We're trying to support an overall game philosophy, an overall game idea, and we really need to design those things up front. So once we get these sketches and we've decided what we want destructible, that's when the art staff kind of goes in and, we continually work with design, but it starts to be our iterative process. We start with a sketch, we start doing designs, do call-outs, color studies, and ultimately leading up to kind of the progression into the final piece of art that you see in-game. And this is really a very iterative process. I just showed you a simple slideshow right here about sketch to final, and this is it takes a lot longer than what I just showed you right there, but as you can see, the final in-game screenshot is a little bit different than what we had on the sketch side of things, but that's a natural progression in the iterative process that happens when you work closely with design. There are certain things that you want to accomplish. When you work closely with story, there are certain things that they want to accomplish, and everybody gets together and we work as a team to come up with the final artistic look. So that pretty much wraps up our process, and I think we're going to open it up now to questions.
Hello. So my question is connected to Diablo himself, the character. In the end of the Diablo 2, we went to hell, killed him, smashed the soul stone containing his essence, Baal's, Mephisto's. So basically we destroyed him completely. So how do you justify him coming back and creating trouble yet again?
First of all, you don't know for sure that Diablo's coming back. I mean, just because it's called Diablo. It's a very complex chain of events that we really don't have time to go into here. So, no, we can't. We don't really want to divulge too much of the story yet. Let's just say it's sure to be entertaining when you see it.
Hello. In the previous game, we had sort of quests to achieve to get, for example, the heroic coup. I was wondering if in these games we will have some sort of lore or mission about getting some special items. For example, the heroic coup, will he be there again?
The way the process works is that we look into the story, we look into the lore, and we really want that to drive the gameplay. We want that to drive the quests. So, whereas even if I knew for sure, which I don't, we wouldn't be divulging specific details about what you may or may not find. I could say, with certainty that there will be quests definitely related to lore, because that's why we want to use our quests. We want to tell the story through our quests this time. We don't want to just have quest to get this or get that. We want the quest to resonate with the main story. So things like the Roderick Cube, I don't know specifically if we'll be bringing that back, but we know everyone loves that type of thing. So we work closely on the story and lore side with our game designers and our item designers, and that stuff just kind of comes about organically, which is kind of how it happened in Diablo 2 as well. They didn't set out to say, hey, let's make this great cube. It just kind of came out of the game design process. Thanks.
I wanted to know about the random generation of the outdoor environment in Diablo 2. Do you plan to keep this idea in order to have like a new experience of the game for each character we create? And also for all the loot, if it will still randomly generated, so we don't seem like we create like 2, 3, 4 barbarians to have always different characters, even if we begin the game like 10th time again.
The extent of the randomness on the outdoors we're still kind of exploring. It's definitely a core value of the Diablo franchise to have randomness within that. And if you saw Jay Wilson's talk yesterday about the gameplay panel, one of the interesting things that we're doing artistically is what are we calling those things? The random adventures, thank you, in which small pockets of the environment will be randomly swapped out, so you can have a different experience each time that you go through there. So artistically, we're developing different tool sets to accomplish that goal that we accomplished in Diablo 2. I think Leonard wanted to talk a little bit about the story on that one.
Yeah, what we're doing with the adventures that Brian was just mentioning is we'll have a certain size plot of land, for instance, where we can swap out randomly a bunch of different occurrences, whether they be scripted or AI-driven or just cool scenery, so that just like in dungeons, you know, when you play the game multiple times, you won't know specifically what's going to be in each area. And we use these kind of like what I was talking about, visual storytelling, maybe to get some side quests, maybe just as you know, cool eye candy. But that's one way that we're keeping the randomness within some storytelling, is that we use those as kind of self-contained ways to explain maybe a specific detail of the universe, or to give, you know, offer up some intriguing bit of information that the player will then maybe want to go research more, which maybe a guy in town might have more information about. But you know, you might get that little tidbit while you play the game, and your friend might not. So there's just all these different ways to utilize these things that we haven't really even explored yet. But it's a very deep system that we're going to play around with a lot as we continue development.
What old places from Diablo 2 are we going to see, and how have they changed in the last 20 years?
Well, I can tell you that the game starts in New Tristram, which is just outside of Old Tristram. And, of course, Deckard Cain comes back, and you'll probably see some NPCs and maybe a hero or two that you might have played in previous games coming back. Beyond that, you'll just have to wait and see.
Firstly, I'd like to say you guys rock, big time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you guys have any plans on making any new villains, obviously, because you had like Mephisto and Baal and Diablo, are you going to have that again, or is it just one-off?
Let's see, how can I answer that? Yes and no. We will, well, there are 7 Lords of Hell, and let's see how many, can we count how many we've actually killed in the series? I won't say anything more about that. And there are some new ones that I'm sure we'll come up with along the way.
In your presentation, you told that people basically forgot some events in Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 or see them as legions, you know. But we know that those events had a great impact on the world. For instance, in Korast, the whole place has been overrun by evil jungle, and this is a major change, you know. And it's hard to believe that people just forgot that and just see it as an old fairy tale.
Well, gee, I guess we'll have to start over then. No, really, what it is, I mean, if you think about the world, I mean, this is a world where you have Vigere mages summoning demons constantly, so people cannot deny that there is weird stuff going on constantly. You can barely walk down the road without being attacked by, 15 goatmen. So this isn't a world that's by any means safe. Civilizations fall all the time by being overrun by weird, bizarre creatures. It's more of whether there is an ultimate, war between these giant forces, or whether this is all just part of, it wouldn't seem natural to us, but part of their natural world. Obviously, something very weird and bad happened in Karast. Something obviously happened in Tristram, but human beings have a huge capacity for rationalization. And the people who do remember it, who were there on the periphery, maybe didn't experience it firsthand, it's kind of more a denial mechanism than them actually not believing it happened. It's like they don't want to believe it happened. And to a certain degree, it's kind of a philosophical argument whether there is, because even if you saw it destroyed firsthand, if you didn't, sit down and have a philosophical discussion with Diablo, you have to take the guy who killed Diablo's word for it, that it was Diablo and he's a lord of hell and all that. So it's kind of more on that level, whether this is just, a really bad world that just random stuff happens in, or is there really this eternal conflict between heaven and hell? And a part of it's political. I'm going on way too long again, so I'll let her answer. Sorry.
Are you going to add more riddles and Easter eggs like the cow level?
Yeah, we put all that stuff into every Blizzard game, so we don't have a solid list yet, but I'm sure there will be.
Hi, Medieval Dragon from Bliss Planet and DiabloFans.com. Elfen Light from the forums asks, what's up with Angel Inarius? Is he still at the prison of mirrors? The Sin War didn't rule it out. Special thanks to Richard Neck and Marco Palmieri from Pocketbooks.
Okay. He asked if, I guess I should ask if this is what you asked. Inarius was the angel who used the World Stone to create Sanctuary along with demons, the help of some demons, specifically Lilith. And he was, in an arrangement between heaven and hell, he was allowed to be taken to hell by the demons kind of as punishment. The question was whether he is still there. As far as any of us know, he is still there. And thanks for the Diablo III website, by the way.
I'd just like to ask, how indestructible the environment's going to be? Are we going to get to level the entire city blocks, or is it just going to be a few benches now and then? I mean, what are we going to get to blow up and smash?
As much as we need to have the game as fun as possible. It's something that we're constantly exploring, just how much we can put in and what kind of payoff we get. So as much as we can, but yeah, we'll just have to see. It's something we're still exploring.
All right, everyone, that concludes the Q&A session for the World Lore and Environment Art panel. Give a round of applause to Leonard and Brian.
Thank you all for coming out and listening to us ramble on, some of us longer than others. Have a good rest of your day.